In this lecture, we're going to make a density graph. And a density graph is very, very similar to the histogram we just made, except for that it's a smooth graph. Instead of having bins like the histogram has, different bars, it's a smoothed out version of that, basically. And you'll see when we make our first one. So we're going to be using the data frame msleep. And this data frame, if you look it up, actually, it comes with ggplot 2. And I've pulled it up in the help bar over here. It's an updated and expanded version of the mammal sleep dataset. So if we take a look at it, this is what it looks like. It's got the name of a whole bunch of animals, their genus, what type of food they eat, so whether they're carnivores, omnivores, herbivores, or insectivores, their order, conservation status, and various other things. But the two columns that we're going to focus on are the vor column, what they eat, and the sleep total, so how many hours per day they sleep. So that's what we're going to be graphing. If we just make a basic density plot, this is what it's going to look like. We're going to put ggplot, our base code, our data frame, and notice I don't need to put data equals, although I can just put the data frame name. So that's what I'm going to do for here, the data name. Then this is going to be the x value, and this is the same for all of them. I have been putting x equals and y equals, but you don't actually have to do that. You can just put the name of the column you want in your x, comma, the name you want your y to be, comma, and then fill equals or color equals. But for simplicity and ease of understanding, I usually write x equals and y equals just so it's clear to people reading my code. So I'll put x equals for now. I want the sleep total column, which is how many hours they sleep, to be on the x-axis. And then I want the fill color to be what kind of food they eat. So I actually want there to be 4 different lines on this graph, one for each different type of animal. So that's carnivore, insectivore, omnivore, and herbivore. And then I'm going to add my geom density add-on, which will tell it that I want to make a density graph. So here we've got our graph, and we've got the total number of hours they sleep on the x-axis, how frequently that occurs in the data frame on the y-axis, and each of the colors represents an animal of a different diet. So purple, we've got omnivores here, insectivores, herbivores, but you notice there's this weird gray color, and we have the 4 colors, the 4 categories here, but there's no gray, so we have to figure out what that is. So if we look back at our msleep, now whenever I see data that doesn't quite fit in my graph, I always think there must be missing data somewhere, or there must be something weird. So I'm going to check the sleep total and the vor columns, and what immediately draws my attention is that we've got an NA here in the vor column. So seeing that, I know that what that means is this gray is all those NAs in the vor column. It doesn't know where to put them, so it's just made a gray box that represents all those. Because they don't have a value in there, what we want to do is strip out all those NAs from the data frame itself. And we learned how to strip out rows with NAs in a couple videos ago, so if you want to go and review that, you can. But we're going to do that right now. We're just going to save over top of the msleep data frame. We don't need to make a new one, really. So we're going to say msleep when the column vor is not NA. And we're just going to get a data frame where it's not NA. So when we run this, that should get rid of all of the NAs. And if we go back and check it out, I notice that there are no longer any NAs in the vor column. So that's perfect. Now we're ready to graph it again. And if we check this, now there's no longer a weird gray section in front blocking off this. But this graph isn't quite done. This isn't perfect. Because while it looks cool, we can't really see the carnivore color back there, and that's not the best. So what we want to do is we want to change it around a little bit. And to do this, we've got our base code up here. What we're going to do is we're going to modify the geom density add-on. And what we're going to do is put alpha equals a number in there. And alpha, as you recall, is the transparency of the color fill. So by setting it at a number lower than 1, we're making it more transparent. And if we run just this part, you'll see what I mean. So now this is much better because we can see through to the red, and that's much better, so we can actually see our data. Now, another thing I want to do is, if you recall, this is the number of hours slept per day. We've only got from 0 to 20 here, but as we all know, a day has 24 hours in it, so I'm going to change the x-axis limits, and I'm going to make it from 0 to 24. So the next thing I'm going to go over is how to change this legend over here. We probably don't want it to just be called vor. That doesn't really explain what it is. And I want to change it so that instead of carne, urbe, insecti, it's actually the full word. So there are two ways we can do this. One, we can change it right in the graph. And two, we can actually change the data frame itself. So we're going to change the graph first. And we're going to do this by adding on scale fill manual. And within this, we're going to put a whole bunch of different things. So you can see this parenthesis ends all the way over here. So all of this stuff is within the scale fill manual parentheses. So the first thing I'm actually going to do within here is change the colors mapped to each of these. So I'm using hex codes, and what it's going to do is it's going to apply this to the top option in the key, this to the second, this to the third, and the fourth. So I've just chosen 4 colors that I think kind of go with the labels. The next thing I'm going to do is change the name of the legend. So the title in here, instead of saying vor, it's now going to say animal diet. And then what I'm going to do is relabel each of these. So when I say breaks, that's where I tell it the original names of all the categories. And then when I say labels, I'm going to label them differently. So I'm labeling carne as carnivore, herby as herbivore, etc. So when we run this whole thing, it's going to change all of those elements at once. So we can see we've changed all the colors to different colors, and we've also changed the title of the legend and all the labels in the legend so that it's the actual words instead of these abbreviations. Now, the second way of changing these labels over here is by actually going into the data frame itself and changing the names. And to do this, we have to call up the different levels of this data frame. So if you notice, my arrow is all the way over here, and the names I've put the new names over here in quotation marks, and I'm saving the name carnivore into everywhere where the levels of m sleep when vor equals carne. So this whole line goes in and replaces everywhere that we see carne with carnivore instead. So I've done the same thing with all 4 of the different labels. So now if we go in and if we view M sleep, we can see that it's gone in and it's changed every single instance of carne or omni to the more proper names that I've instructed it to put in. So you might want to go in and do this if you're going to be making a lot of graphs with this data, and you don't want to have to keep going in and replacing the letters for each individual graph. Changing it in the data frame is going to be much easier in that instance. So now we've changed all these, so we can graph it again. And notice how much shorter this code is for the exact same thing as above. This is super long because we had to replace all those names, but here we don't have to do that. So now all we want to do is change the colors and the name of the legend. And if we run that, it makes the exact same graph. Now the next thing we're going to do is add in some different labels. These aren't the best labels. We've got sleep underscore total on the bottom. That's not very descriptive. Density, also not very descriptive. And there's no title. So we're going to add in all of those things. We're going to add a GG title, sleep patterns of animals with differing diets. We're going to change the x-axis label to total sleep daily in hours, and the y-axis label to frequency. And we're going to keep all the other elements the same. So this graph looks a heck of a lot better than the original graph that we made. We aren't hiding any of the data. We've got more accurate labels, and our legend is labeled accurately. So I do want to show you this one more thing you can do, and there are a whole bunch of different ways to do this, but I'm just going to show you one, and this isn't the ideal graph for this, but we're going to do it because this data frame lends itself to this method a little more than the other ones we've used. What I'm going to do is instead of putting all 4 of these graphs on one graph, I'm going to separate them out into multiple graphs by using the facet grid addition. And by putting vor in here, I'm saying I want to separate it by vor. That's the factor I want to separate out. So it's saying make each of these graphs a different graph. And I'm just going to show you what this does. So here it takes each of these 4 things and makes it its own graph. And here it's stacked them on top of each other. But all I have to do is switch the vor and the period here, and then run this, and it will do it the other way. And if I had another element by which I wanted to separate them, I could also put that here. So if I had carnivore, and maybe if I had like age of animal, then it would separate it in two different directions. But we don't have one, so we're just going to keep it like that. And I'm going to put it back to the way it was before because this doesn't look the best. It's all up to you to determine which direction and which colors and everything will make your graph look the nicest. So I'll go into the facet grid function a little more later. I'll get some better data for it, but I just wanted to show it to you with some data that you're familiar with, just to show you the different possibilities for this kind of graph.